Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report. Our scientist Dan Morrison's here. We hope to chase down Professor McCanney. And again, I heard recently that he doesn't. You can't hear his cock crowing in the background like cock-a-doodle-doo. You can hear some geese apparently, wherever he is in some rural area. I know some months ago he was in Siberia. I'm sure he does some remote research. He does some amazing stuff. And of course, his links are directly up on for Twyland, which is Anne's email blog website. You can sign up for a subscription to get the email newsletter on all our science information, and End Times blog. And I think the history of the word Twyland. Can you explain that word Twyland? Because I think it's really important for people to understand. When I endorse someone like yourself as a very good scientist and a believer, and you're trying to connect the science and the end time history of what's going on in our world today, they need to understand this is important information. So signing up for your blog is going to be very important. What does Twyland mean?
Well, that's a term I coined for those thin places, those places where the earthly realm meets the heavenly realm. And mystics and saints have often, and prophets, have often had communication with God in the spiritual realm. And so I wanted to be able to talk about that, and so that's why I called it Twyland. It's kind of, it's like twilight. It's between good and bad. It's between light and dark. Well, this is between man and God. Yeah,
that's really good. And you sent over a recent email this morning on top of your newsletter, and we're going to go down through some of these articles, but I strongly recommend people sign up for the newsletter blog, which will be sent out as a mass email to them. You have I guess you sent a report earlier today, update for today, and you include a lot of interesting information, and it's also over on your Twyland site. Let's go down through some of this update as of today. Live anthrax shipments, etc. What's going on worldwide?
Well, the Dugway, the military laboratory at Dugway in Utah, sent out what was supposed to be inactivated anthrax to 9 states and to a military base in South Korea. Well, they do their own testing at each one of these laboratories that they sent to, and one of the laboratories discovered that the anthrax was not attenuated; it was alive, and so wow. So now they're in the process of checking with all of the laboratories to make sure they did their, what we would have called receiving inspection, to make sure that the anthrax was dead. Because, live anthrax can only be handled in a biosafety level 4 laboratory. It's very fatal. And I assume that it wasn't. We don't have that many biosafety level 4 laboratories around the country.
Or they have pseudo biosafety 4. What they do is they'll certify it as BSL 4, but they're actually a BSL 3, and they've just recertified them. They only have like a half biosuit. They don't have low pressure air infiltration systems where the entire facility is under negative pressure. I know the specific certifications of a BSL 4, and it's very hard to make a building BSL 4 certifiable.
That's right. Now, apparently the way their protocol for inactivating anthrax is that they irradiate it with gamma rays. Well, that's well and good, but it's kind of like using a microwave oven. You know how a microwave oven doesn't heat the whole piece of meat that you've got in there, or the whole entree. What it does is it just heats up various spots within that entree.
Exactly. So, you might get some of the spores. I know about experiments done at the biosafety thing called Biopreparat facility in Michigan, University of Michigan, where they're making the anthrax vaccine, which is the guys that actually got in Special Forces that I saw personally. They said it was like being kicked across the other side of the room by a donkey. And these are guys that are tough guys, jumping out of helicopters with a 120-pound backpack, or hanging upside down from a helicopter on a wire with a night vision scope. And they said they couldn't move or even breathe for a week, let alone sleep. And the anthrax vaccine, what happens is when you heat it up, like even putting 2 or 3 atmospheres of pressure or more at 1,200 degrees, it doesn't kill it. So, anthrax is not an easy little devil to kill. The weaponizer is simple.
Spores is easy to kill.
Exactly.
Spores
and the spores
are Yeah, spores are very
They're almost
difficult to
indestructible.
kill.
Yeah, you had to incinerate 2,000 degrees to burn it, to get it rid of it. And if you don't, if you're just kind of blasting it with gamma rays, it's kind of hit or miss.
Now, I want you to click on the picture, and what that's going to take you down to is a tab called Biosecurity-Anthrax.
Yes.
And just scroll down there, and there, the last time that this was studied was after the anthrax debacle in, 2003?
Right.
When the Postal Service was delivering anthrax to homes. And people died from that.
By the way, did you know...
They did a big study, and I have included the table. If you scroll down, you'll find the table that
table
shows
2, right?
What they tested to kill anthrax. So they tested chemical sterilization and gaseous sterilization and radiation.
Wow.
And you can get the results there. Now, they say they had 100% killed with gamma radiation, and that's what they've been using. But,
well, it depends on what version of the anthrax. Remember, they've been changing the genetics of the anthrax. They've also changed how they change to make sure the spores don't clump together. One of the first steps in weaponizing it is to simply put it through a fabric softener. So you can literally go to an abattoir or a slaughterhouse and get some blood. Go and get a shovel of cow manure and then grow your own anthrax. And if you just put it through a millipore filter and then put it through, just add bounce or liquid fabric softener, it weaponizes it immediately. That's how easy it is to weaponize anthrax. It's a fabric softener.
One of the points I'm trying to make is that was over 10 years ago. So what happened in that duration in the last 10 years was that it got the results of this study. The scientists who performed the study and the ones that decided on the protocol to be used wrote the books, and they based those protocols on certain characteristics, like you said, of the anthrax and of whether it was spores or powder or exactly what it was. And people now are just following those books. They just, it's just rote. They just read it and then they do it. They read it, they do it. Well, lots of things can change. Like you said, they've changed the genome of the anthrax, or the spores have changed. And so the protocol that was good 15 years ago may not be good anymore.
They're also sloppy. I mean, to be honest with you, they were putting literally, you know how they were doing it? They were putting up 4 to 5 atmospheres of pressure at 14 to 1500 degrees to explode the spores in what's called a high-pressure environment. And when they explode the spores, they literally took that soup and just literally injected it live, along with formaldehyde and toxic heavy metals to create the anthrax vaccine. That's why it was so damn dangerous. The other thing is that the anthrax itself, March of 2001, I met with the CDC and FBI director because I was appointment under Reserve Admiral Hughes in 97 on Operation Top Off in Dark Winter in Colorado. Some people have put up reports that it happened after 9/11, that Dark Winter happened after. Hogwash. It happened 4 years before 9/11. I was involved in it directly, and I was appointment because I had a background in infectious disease. When I met at the Adams Mark Hotel with the CDC and FBI director for the National Bioweapons Program, because we were working on bioweapon simulations, they were talking about the idea of anthrax release as a bioweapon simulation in the northeast United States in the fall of 2001, 6 months before 9/11. So I knew about it coming because the government did it. The government did 9/11, which is a demolition of those buildings. The government released the anthrax because we tracked the specific substrain of anthrax that they had. And it wasn't just a garden variety backwoods, Kansas or Nebraska anthrax from somebody's cow patty. It was a weaponized version of anthrax that was released through classified sources to the public on purpose to create a series of terror attacks. So they terrorized the public into allowing things like the Patriot Act and all the other stuff that happened.
Well, that worked, because we did pass the Patriot Act.
Yeah, an unpatriotic act. How's that?
Yeah, really.
Scary and scarier, and oh my God, scary news. Let's go on, please.
Oh, this is critical news, Dr. Bell. This is news that everybody needs to listen to. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease was known as a disease of Jewish men in their 70s. The incubation period for it was 70 years. And then people would get it, and they'd die 10 years later. But in 1990, our world changed because people in Britain, 3,000 people in Britin died of Prion disease, and they called it a variant of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. So they put a little V in front of it for variant because the incubation time was only 7 years.
Right.
And it didn't occur just in Jewish families. Now we know that people who eat beef can get the prions because the prions are very hard to kill. They can, even when they do neurosurgery on somebody who has this disease,
right.
they cannot sterilize their instruments. They have to
destroy the instruments, yeah. And in fact, the only way to actually clean the operating room is to actually burn it down. They can't sterilize the instruments. They have to destroy them. They have to put them back into a metallurgical furnace and melt them down because they can't use those instruments. They can't be autoclaved. And the prions, by the way, will survive up to a century in the ground, and plants will take up the prions. And when animals eat those plants, they'll get the prion disease, which will take over their DNA and create new prions. So they develop spongiform changes in their brain, and it not only hits the brain, it'll hit other organs, spinal cord, liver, and other tissues, and turn them to spongiform because it takes over the endoplasmic reticulum and generates protein particles because it uses the retrovirus control system of activating the ability to generate messenger RNA from the protein to actually replicate the protein particles and take over the cellular process in the cells, so the structural proteins stop being made and only prions. Pretty amazing, eh?
Well, and that's not the whole news. The new news is that they excrete the prions in their urine and in their patties. Cattle do.
Right.
And so think of the deer that fertilized the ground where the ground you are eating was grown.
Right.
And that corn takes up the prions. And you are eating the corn, which has the prions in it. And 7 years from now, you'll be dead. This is serious stuff.
That's why we have our supplements that we get are we call prion certified non-prion soil from Argentina or New Zealand or Australia, so that we make certain that the source of our animals, like our bone generator crystals, are actually prion free. And people don't realize that. That's why I tell people, if you're going to have, for example, free range cattle, you want to make sure they're on free range ranches where there's no wild deer that are in a prion area where the deer can be carrying prions and actually then infect the cattle, and the cattle may not get immediate disease. And the problem is that because cattle grow so quickly, it's only older cattle that a lot of them sudden show these signs where they start getting unsteady and falling over and not eating properly and wasting. They get prion wasting disease where they stop wanting to eat, and they start getting significant, very advanced organic brain damage. And the problem is that it's near impossible to get rid of these prion proteins. Literally,
not only that, these cows are carrying these prions long before you can see the ramifications of the disease, before you see the symptoms.
Well, in Canada, what's happened is there's a number of these farms where they've been growing exotic animals where there's ostriches or buffalo, and they had a prion breakout because of an interface between wild animals and the buffalo, and they had to condemn the land. This is in Canada. They had to condemn the land that no one could grow any meat products on that land forever, because even a century after these animals die and their bones and their tissues are in the soil, those plants can continue taking the prions up into the body of the plant and infect wild animals or cattle or bison, buffalo, which they're growing up there, and they can infect them even a century later. That's crazy, isn't it?
This is very, very serious stuff. And like I said, when you think that deer, for instance, are coming in and eating on your garden, and, we don't like that, and we chase them away, but it's more of a nuisance value. This is a critical health issue. We not only need to chase them away, we need to eliminate them.
Right, and not only that, you got to remember, it's not just deer, it could be coyotes. Coyotes can be carrying prion disease. Any mammalian species that can allow animal droppings in your yard or whatever can infect your garden or your fruit trees, and the fruit trees will take up the prions and put it in the fruit as well. So you need to be aware that there's an interface between wild animals that could be carrying prion disease. It's another end-time plague. I mean, people have to understand this. People say, well, the end times is not happening. I'm saying, I'm sorry, it's not a matter of going to happen. It's like the book that I have right on my desk here from Carl Gallup's, we have already heard a lot of the trumpet blasts. In fact, you can hear them up in space, the sounds of the trumpets. And I have my theory as to what it is. It's basically the gravity waves hitting the upper troposphere, and the expansion and collapse of the tropospheric air caused by the heating, by the impingement of energies coming in from the gravity wave, causes a sound like a trumpet up in the upper atmosphere. And you're hearing them all over the planets, because those are the same things, the gravity waves, that triggered off the shutting down of CERN and the Nepal superquake that occurred recently. It's all due to gravity waves from an incoming dwarf star, which, of course, the globalists know well that it's happening. I've talked extensively with Richard Allen Murray, my classified sources, and many others. I've been researching this for a quarter century, and I can tell you it's not imaginary, it's not a conspiracy, it's real. And the fact is that the rate of evolution of these viruses and so on is now greatly increased. Since last year, the number of wild animal pathogenic pandemic viruses, bacteria, parasites, and human parasites and viruses and resistant bacteria has doubled worldwide just in 1 year. Wow. That's scary stuff, Ed.
Yeah, when the prion epidemic hit the United Kingdom, what they decided was that it was a vertical transfer. In other words, they were grinding up parts of the cow that humans wouldn't eat, like the brain and the nervous system, and then putting it in the feed. They were turning cows into cannibals, and then putting it in the feed for other cows, and that's how. Well,
that's how it happened. These are crazy people in Britain decided that they could grow bigger and faster cattle with more body mass if they literally ground up the old cattle, including their bone marrow and spinal cord and parts of their body, offal and everything, and putting it in feed to grow the other cattle faster toward their marketable size and weight. And that's what they did in Britain. That's how this all started.
Well, now we know that it could have also been a horizontal transfer. That is, that a sick cow urinated on the ground. Another cow came along and ate the grass and got the prions in it, and then it went someplace else and tainted the ground with the prions. So, you've got several modes of transfer that they never even thought of before. They never even considered this.
Yeah, and in fact, I'll tell you what's going to happen is people are going to have to start growing their food in greenhouses and in places secure away from interface with wild animals, coyotes, and other things. And even cattle are going to have secure fenced-in areas where there won't be an interface with the animals that can carry prion disease. And they need to start sampling the ground and testing for prion presence, because if it is, the ground should be condemned. So you can't grow food there like corn or crops, ever, because they don't have technology right now to get rid of prions.
Hamsters are a good sentinel.
Are they?
Yeah.
Because they live fast and die young, hey?
Yes.
Something like some of the teenagers in the... And welcome back, and let's go through some more of this news. Still trying to track down Professor McCanney. We would have had an interesting discussion if we could have had Professor McCanney and Dr. Richard Allen Miller. Let's go through some of these. We do have Professor McCanney. Professor McCanney, I had an interesting discussion this morning with Dr. Richard Allen Miller. You're probably aware of him. You're one of the only Tier 1 scientists, I think, in the world that actually puts out articles, books, and materials, including your amazing, how can I say it, device that actually will measure time over 10,000 years that you sent me, as well as the DVDs. We have a link directly up on our associates page, so they bring it directly to all your books and DVDs and materials, which are, I call required reading. If you really want to know the nature of the universe and Tier 1 science, and as I say, it's bad astrophysics that actually is leading to a lot of the bad decisions by globalist governments that think that they are going to save themselves or a segment of civilization by implementing policies based on bad science. So when you see a lot of the disasters happening, like the disaster in Texas, the extreme weather we're having around the planet, the degradation of the ozone layer, the increased ground level ozone generation, and the destruction of the upper ozone layer, increased ultraviolet light, when you're seeing increased earthquakes and volcanoes all over the planet, how would you tie it with astrophysics and your models of the science of the weather systems, which are obviously not driven by the so-called meteorological theories that, the water is heated up by the sun and somehow it generates weather and so on, which is total garbage. It's plasma physics, and it's geared like the gears of our weather are geared to the gears of the sun and the cosmos. Your theories make sense. Yeah, and I want you to explain this, because people, when they see extreme weather in Texas, It's one of two things. It's due to the weather is totally screwed up from the condo site that killed the loop current, and the ozone destruction and the plasma physics of Fukushima Daiichi, which is totally screwing up the normal weather systems. Those several things. And then on top of it, the geoengineering of the weather by global maniacs who are weather manipulating, not just by HARP, because I see people even send me HARP things still. It's satellite-based systems using high-energy lasers and nearest weapon platforms, and plasma physics using plasma interferometry, which of course was discussed and explained by Nikola Tesla, used to manipulate weather where they don't have any mandate, any certification, or any authority to do this stuff that's extremely dangerous and destructive. I don't think people realize when you see these massive super floods in Texas, the globalists are not going to tell us that they have screwed up the weather, or that they won't fix Fukushima, which is screwing up the weather, or when they drilled at the Macondo drill site, it has destroyed the loop current, which is a pacemaker for world climate and the jet stream. All of this stuff, it's like a bunch of maniacs in a sandbox doing whatever the heck they please, and we're the ones that suffer for it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the insanity in science today. On my show last night, I talked about dealing with dysfunctional science. Excuse me. And
you may want to get a little closer to the microphone because we want to hear you a little louder.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can tone up here a bit.
That's better.
Dealing with dysfunctional science is just absolutely insane. I mean, the what's being taught today as top level of science is absolutely absurd. The weather, whether it's dealing with plate tectonics, which is a theory that never worked in the first place.
Right.
But the situation with weather control, we're talking about Texas, Oklahoma, these massive rainstorms just beyond belief.
Right.
That's what I call it's weather bombing. It's a term I developed because in warfare, you soften an area up, like before you send in the land troops, you soften it up with a bombing routine, and that used to be dropping carpet bombing or whatever techniques, cross bombing. World War II, the B-17s with 2,000 planes at a time, cross carpet bombing the area, and then you send in the troops. Now they do it with weather, and it's very clear they're targeting Texas. I imagine because it's on the Mexican border. It's a border state. It's the main border state between the United States and Mexico. But there's other things going on. I think it would make an example of possibly one of the states where you have the highest number of, not to use a term, but rednecks, which we love our rednecks. So it's not a derogatory term. But the number of people, the shooting of these 10 bikers down there, this insanity that's going on. What it tells me is, desperate people are doing desperate things, and that's the tale of the world controllers right now. They are just doing they're doing all kinds of things that are absolutely insane. They had control, and people would have just let them, if they would have just kept on, with their banking, etc. But they are never happy. They have to continue to, push the level of insanity farther and farther. I've heard people say that the United States right now is exactly where Germany was pre-World War II Germany. And so, and that's probably the case. People are leaving. People are saying, this cannot hold up. I talked this last few weeks to many people in the alternative, what you would call the preparedness, that are selling all kinds of preparedness products. All of their sales are down to like 20% of what they were a year ago, which tells you two things. People are out of money, and they're believing that there's not even enough time for them to receive something shipped to them. They're standing off. It's like, okay, whatever happens now happens. We can't prepare anymore. We can't do anymore. I think that's the mental attitude. People are ready for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah, I think actually it's not. I know that feeling's out there because the government is constantly assaulting people's psyche with false news and fear tactics like Jade Helm, which I call terror porn by the government and the media. I don't think it's that disastrous. I think simple prepping, like starting off with even having 3 weeks of food, water, and self-protection, and having some backup power, even a small solar generator, if that's all you can get to start with. As I say, prep at the level you can do today. And then start looking at other levels above that, whether like I'm in a home that's outside a large city in the rural mountain areas, but I'm also working toward a project we talked about in the last hour with our guest Dave and Jean Mitchell. We're going to set up a prepper community here, and multiple prepper communities not only across America but in other places in the world. I call cities of refuge, where there'll be basically complete communities that can have power generation, medical, dental care, have people with personal protection. People can weld, do various skill sets, ham radio operation, etc. Mending clothes, knowing how to do laundry with the old style laundry machines and so on, so that we can have some semblance of civilization. Not if, but when civilization crashes. Because something as simple as a power blackout, which is an absolute certainty. They did a study last year and a half ago here in California, and they found out just putting the grid on the grid, wind and solar generation will blow the grid to pieces. It's not imaginary. Yep. Just putting those on the grid will blow the power grid to pieces. It's not going to survive. I give the grid 2 to 5 years max before it is in tatters, and if they don't reinvent the grid, it's gone. It's not going to exist. So people need to understand within 6 months of the grid going down, I have this from Canadian, high-level Canadian, American, and Australian sources, all 3 countries, 90% of the population in these countries will be dead in 6 months. 90%. And that's without a plague, without a war, without a astronomical disaster or a near-Earth asteroid or meteor storm or anything. Just the power grid going out. Just the grid. People say, no, that can't happen. I said, well, it's all war gamed out. They know on supercomputers and everything, that's the consequences. That's the ballpark number. 90% DEAD dead in 6 months if the grid goes down. And if you're not prepping, believe me, you're going to be sorry state. Professor McKenney, we were talking on the break about the draining of the lake above the caldera out Yellowstone. And this is, if you want to call it, priority number 1. This is even more important in some ways than even fixing the nuclear reactors across the country and fixing the power grid. If that caldera drains into the lake drains into the caldera, we're going to have what we call a pyroclastic steam-generated super explosion that will destroy the western United States. And the explosion will be so great it'll actually plunge the world into a nuclear winter and destroy crops, and most of the population of Earth will die from famine.
Yeah, this is the biggest issue on the planet. And John Moore, I had him one time. I thought he'd be a good person to spearhead the effort, contacting the congressmen, the legislators, the state, the federal forestry, etc. And what you get is the secretary or some kind of administrative assistant, and the response was, "What's a volcano?" That was the response.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not. John will tell you that. We are dealing with such incompetence today in all levels of government. And so what I'm thinking is I'm just going to go up there. I'm going to go up there and start doing it. I don't know if I have to take a shovel and say, okay, everybody, you can join me, and I'm going to, have it on a YouTube video or a video on my homepage or on your page. And here's Jim McCanney. He's got a shovel up there. He's trying to dig a trench to get the lake drained out of Yellowstone and off into the southeastern arm there, and out of the area.
Right.
I mean, that's what.
And the Army Corps engineers could easily do that. They could trench that away so that it would run into an alternate flow path away from the caldera, so you wouldn't end up with a danger.
The flow path is already there. It just has to be deeper, and you could.
Right.
Drain
so you just
the
have to get the Army Corps engineers to actually fix it so it'll actually drain properly.
Yeah, and the path is there. It's to drain it out the southeast corner, the southern arm, they call it, is the place to go, because the northern part is where all of the hot spots are, where all of the surface magma is up on the north side.
Okay, well, we're talking about earthquakes and volcanoes. I want Ann to kind of mention this, and I would like you to jump back in, Jim, Dr. Jim. So you have a panel here about seismic monitoring, and tell us about what's going on. And Professor McCanney, the amount of earthquakes and volcanoes since Fukushima Daiichi 4.5 years ago has gone up 500% in the area of Japan, but it's all over the world too. Volcanic earthquake activity everywhere, and it's interesting that the shutting down of CERN happened at literally the same moment as the earthquake that occurred in the mountains of. Trying to think of the country. Nepal, the Nepal mountains.
Oh,
and of course, what's happening, people don't understand. This is gravity waves coming from an incoming dwarf star that's out in deep space, and literally can be pretty far out there, 0.73 light years. But the hyperelliptical comets coming in, the increased volcanic activity. Jesus said in Matthew 24, and they shall see earthquakes in diverse places increase dramatically. This is an end-time sign, people. I'm not making it up. Jesus said it. If you believe in Jesus, you believe in God. And if you can actually just look at your news, you need to understand what Professor McCanney and Andrew are going to talk about here. This is happening today. You don't need to prophesy it. It's now. Tell us what's going on, Ann and Professor McCanney.
Well, yeah, we're continuing to see an increase in both earthquakes, large earthquakes, and volcanoes. I don't know if you saw the pictures, but Mount Shindaki in Japan violently erupted. The Wolf volcano erupted on Galapagos Island.
Right.
And then the volcanic ash from the Calbuco volcano in Chile, it's actually on the border between Chile and Argentina, it circumnavigated the world. And, well, in the southern hemisphere. You wouldn't expect it to show up in the northern hemisphere, thank goodness. But all of them, when you get this much ash in the air, you're going to end up with what's called a volcanic winter. That is, your summers are not going to be, you're not going to get as much sunshine down to the growing crops as you would otherwise, because you've got reflective materials in that ash, and it's like a cloud. It just keeps the light away from the crops.
Right. Not only that, a lot of these areas of volcanoes, like in Iceland, are very high in fluoride and radiotoxins. So a lot of them are very radioactive, as well as having very high fluoride content that wiped out the crops. For example, most people don't realize the famine occurred right before the French Revolution was caused by volcanic activity in Iceland that destroyed the crops across Western Europe. People may or may not know that.
Well, that's true. Then the volcanoes in Iceland have a separate problem, and that is that they make shards of glass because as the silica comes out of the ground, it's frozen immediately. It's flash frozen by the glacier that sits over the volcano. And so you get all sorts of poisonous gases, and yes, you will. That did go into Northern Europe, and it poisoned the crops for at least a year, maybe 2 years.
Yeah, I think actually it was the total before return was 4 years. Professor McCanney, you have some comments about this, because I don't think the government's preparing at all for the general population for increased volcanic earthquake activity. There's a movie coming out this weekend with The Rock, who's got a great shocking look on, because he's a good actor as well as a comedian. But he's also a scary guy if you actually take him seriously, because San Andreas, they're saying, is going to blow. And in fact, some idiots were saying yesterday it was going to happen because of planetary alignments. What do you see happening? Because I don't think the population is preparing. No one's talking about noise-canceling technology to release the energies in small microquakes. Nobody's preparing the population for evacuation drills. Basically, they're just sitting like deer in the headlights at the center of the highway waiting to get hit by a mock truck. It's just crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, the issue with gravitational alignments, it's a non-issue because we are gravitationless to all the other planets and the sun.
Right.
So gravitational alignments is a misnomer.
Right.
We are floating through space-time, curved space-time, with literally no force on us at all.
Right.
So planetary alignments it's always been something people claim, but people that don't know anything about physics.
Exactly.
But the issue is we do have some electrical activity, but they're not the kind of thing that's necessarily going to send us into. There are many, many factors that cause volcanoes and earthquakes to increase, many of them within the Earth. But the thing I wanted to mention, there's a chart, very interesting to see, in the 1700s. there was a volcano in was called Tambora, and it blew off. And at that time, the British Navy was around the world, so they have the temperature records to show that the worldwide temperature dropped. There was a winter. It was actually snowing during the summer in Scandinavia, and widespread starvation all over the world because the wheat crops failed, the grain crops failed, and that's, of course, the breadbasket.
Right.
So there was wide-scale starvation due to a volcano that is off in the straits off of the South China Sea.
Right.
And these things can happen. Now, if you look at that compared to Yellowstone, Yellowstone is thousands of times when it went off before, and if it goes off again, thousands and thousands of times larger in terms of than Tambora. The plume that would go off that would fill the air with dust and cause the cooling effect, etc.
Yeah, bigger than the one that destroyed the Clovis native peoples in North America. People don't realize there were native people on North America that were completely wiped out 75,000 years ago, and they had to recolonize from Asia around 15 to 20,000 years ago. They came across the Bering Strait. But the Clovis Indians were completely destroyed. The history, that's being taught about the population of the United States, what's now the United States, is totally incorrect. Amazing. Again, go to the Associates panel, see Professor James McCanney's amazing books, DVDs, and materials. Get those. Look at Ann's blog on Twyland at the bottom of the panel there. Amazing blog. You want to sign up for it. We'll be back, of course, on Monday. We have some remarkable shows coming up for you. And Jonathan Gray will be back week after next. Dave and Gene will be back here on Wednesday on the 3rd hour. And we've got Tex Mars coming up on next Thursday, that is, the 1st hour. So remarkable shows trying to teach you how to be a Dr. You and how to get more information out about the nature of your world and to start getting prepped in every way, spiritually, physically, medically, and otherwise. Thank you, Professor McKinney and Ann Morrison, our scientist. We'll be back on